No, you can sit there. Don't worry about it, because when he's speaking, I have to sit over there.
I'll sit here. I'll sit the other side.
So when you speak, I'll just sit in your seat. If you'd like some water,
okay.
Would you like some water? Is it Schmitz?
No, she won't.
No. Oh, look at what that Jan Pippinger has on.
A chance for questions from the audience. There's standing mics on either end, so I hope you'll give them a chance to speak. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Grunfeld, and I'm chairman of the Speakers Program. Today we have a continuing encroachment of government into the liberties of citizens. While dissent, supposedly in the interest of standing firm behind America, is being stifled, there is a growing attitude that would do away with the basic civil rights guaranteed by the Constitution. And yet, whether it be from the right or the left, we need dissent to cast perspective, to infuse new life into a system that at times appears to be stale and stagnating. Today we have with us a man cast into that role. His past credentials include former president of Orange County Young Republicans, professor of poli-sci, history and philosophy at Santa Ana College, state senator of Orange County from 1964 through 1970. Although President Nixon's personal U.S. representative to Congress, he is running for president on the American Party ticket. Please welcome John Schmitz.
For those, thank you, Jeff, for that nice introduction. You know, it was back in 1964 when I was first running for the state senate. In my very first speech, I was introduced as the bravest man in the West, and I made the mistake of asking why I was being thus introduced. And the person introducing me said, well, he thought that with all those World War II reissue movies going on all night on TV, that it took a heck of a lot of guts to run for office with a German name and a mustache. But, it'll take a while. You haven't seen the World War II reissue movies, have you? Okay. At any rate, for those of you who have heard that Congressman John Schmitz, the American Party candidate for president, has 7 children, and just so I can make this crystal clear, the young lady I'm traveling with here is the mother of our 7 children, my wife Mary. She is also my leading advisor on the Women's Lib Amendment, and she has twice ordered me to vote against the Women's Lib Amendment because she refuses to be lowered to the status of equality. Come on. And by the way, some of you only know of the American Party and its candidate as being conservatives. Some of you have the wrong idea of what a conservative is. You think a conservative is just someone who doesn't like making changes, likes things the way they always were, and wants them to remain that way. Now, I met someone that way a while back campaigning down south. He was plowing his fields with a pair of mules, and to strike up a conversation, I asked him why he was plowing with mules and everyone else was using tractors, and he was one of those who didn't like making changes. He said, my granddaddy plowed with mules, and my daddy plowed with mules, and what's good enough for granddaddy and good enough for daddy is good enough for me. Well, that wasn't real encouraging for asking him to vote for this new American Party. But I gave him the pitch, and I got the answer I rather expected. He said, no, I said, I can't vote for that new American Party. He said, my granddaddy voted Democrat, my daddy voted Democrat. What's good enough for granddaddy and good enough for daddy is good enough for me. Well, I asked, can I, now wait conservatives, that's not the end of the story. You who don't want to make changes, I asked them, well, can I go up to the farmhouse and talk to your wife? Maybe I can talk her into voting for this new American Party. He said, won't do you any good. And I said, why not? He said, well, I don't have a wife. I said, you don't have a wife? He said, no. He said, don't have a wife. He said, granddaddy didn't have a wife, and daddy didn't have a wife. What's good enough for granddaddy and good enough? Now, By the way, speaking of that German name and a mustache, it does give us one of the few posters that you can't paint a mustache on, and it gives us that bumper strip, that German name, when you're out of Schmitz. Oh, you painted a mustache on anyway, a different type. How about that? But with that German name, we've got that bumper strip you may have seen. When you're out of Schmitz, you're out of gear. Oh, that's pretty bad. Oh. You know, actually, our name used to be Smith, the English version, but we had to change it to the German version because we found that when we got married as John and Mary Smith, we couldn't get a motel room anywhere, so we changed it to the German version. Now, all right, now we've... I'm not really appealing to the sympathy vote, believe me. What I want to do is talk about the real issues. You know, we are not here, or the American Party is not here as a third party. We're here as a second party. You know, George Wallace 4 years ago said there wasn't a dime's worth of difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, and the only difference now is you could get your dime back on that one. Any differences between Richard Nixon and George McGovern could be, and I hope in the future will be, solved in a Socialist Party primary. Now, I find that, I find that, especially in colleges, college students are very anti-totalitarian, but they're very pro-socialist. They miss a very important point. They miss a very important point, and that's that socialism and communism, socialism and communism are not economic systems at all. They're control systems. They're used by totalitarians. It's as simple as that. And the real issue is totalitarianism. That's the real issue in this election. And Richard Nixon, in 4 years in office, under the guise of moderate conservatism, has totalitarianized this country faster in 4 years than anyone I've seen. Now, by the way, gee, I got a lot of supporters here. By the way, if you think I'm beating the drums for George McGovern, you're wrong. I'm not. He's so far left, he's in danger of falling off the earth. But by the way, how's that for being non-paranoid? I'm drinking this water without a taster. How about that? Yeah. It's fluoridated, isn't it? Yeah. Well, look. Now, let me get back to this. By the way, for those of you who McGovernites who think you're in the crusade of the young and the poor and the non-white, why don't you ask yourself where all that money came from? That was a mighty well-oiled crusade of the young and the poor and the non-white, wasn't it? Yeah, about quarter. Oh, look what money. Look, you know, we're the party, the thin cats. Our largest, the American Party's largest contribution is $6,000 from a North Dakota farmer who decided that government subsidies weren't worth government controls. And he's right. And, you know, any government big enough to give you everything you want is also big enough to take away everything you've got. And right now we've got the, at one end, those of inherited wealth who sock their money into tax-free foundations and avoid paying taxes and use those tax-free foundations for political leverage. They're at one end, and at the other end you've got those who find that the difference between working and not working isn't worth working for. And in the middle you've got those overburdened taxpayers who are getting a little tired of carrying the load for the whole bunch. You know, I've boiled our platform, the American Party platform, down to 2 planks. Never go to war unless you plan on winning, and those who work ought to live better than those who will not work. It's as simple as that. Now, your thumbs down on that one. You think people who don't work or will not work ought to live as well as those who work? Come on now. Oh, boy, I tell you, what a brain laundry this place must be. You mean you've been... You really think that those who don't work and will not work ought to live as well as those who work? Yeah. Oh, boy. Oh, man. I tell you, look. Let me get in and talk about totalitarianism. As I pointed out, Richard Nixon, under the guise of moderate conservatism, has been totalitarianizing this country. He's the best Pavlovian psychologist in action. You know, he's the best living example of that old adage that if you get the reputation of being an early riser, you can sleep till 11. Now, you all know Pavlovian psychology, and there's an application to politics. You know, words are related to actions in the same way as that bell is related to the food. After a while, the dogs, of course, had their saliva flowing for the bell instead of the food, even when the food wasn't there. And in politics, politicians have found out that people react more to the word rather than to what the word represents. And so you saw the... by the way, you people might not be moderate conservatives, but polls around the nation show that most people in this country consider themselves moderate conservatives. And also, a recent Time magazine poll showed that 70% of the Americans think that Richard Nixon is a moderate conservative. Look, don't blame Richard Nixon on moderate conservatives. Richard Nixon is not. He is a Pavlovian psychologist. He's ringing the bell of moderate conservatism. In fact, at the coronation, or at that Hollywood production, that sufficed for a Republican convention, you saw Ronald Reagan and Barry Goldwater out there giving with the speeches, and that was supposed to create and continue the image that Richard Nixon is a moderate conservative. He's not. As a matter of fact, after campaigning against Fabian or Keynesian economics, Richard Nixon, in the middle of his 4-year term, said he was a Keynesian economist. After campaigning against deficit spending, Richard Nixon, in 4 years in office, has run up 1/4 of the entire national debt. This is the man who campaigned. Yeah, you like national debts, huh? How about it? You know, I'll tell you, you shouldn't, because you're going to have to pay for it. You are. If you don't pay for it in money, you're going to pay for it in your freedoms. You don't get anything for nothing. And you can rob from Peter to pay Paul, but Peter is simply the next generation, and they're going to have to pay for it. You know, that revenue sharing program, that had all the rhetoric of returning power to local and state governments. Baloney. That was not the salvation of local government, it was the coup de grace. The federal government has nothing to share. It's running in debt. At the same year, they raised the debt ceiling $50 billion. They talk about giving $7, $8, $9 billion that year just to the states and local governments so they can continue to spend more than they take in. Let's face it, the problem is there are all too many people who feel they can vote for a living instead of working for a living. There are all too many people who think you don't have to work, you can simply vote for the right guy because he promises that through government he's going to do something that government can't do, and that is make something out of nothing. Government isn't God, they can't produce something out of nothing. They merely redistribute. And by giving to one, they have to take from another. And Richard Nixon and George McGovern are both talking about redistributing the wealth. And you may like that. But you know what they do? They take from the producers and give to the non-producers so that the producers lose all incentive for producing, and that kills the goose that lays the golden egg. And right now, let me give you an example. Over in China. 15 million free Chinese on the island of Taiwan are out importing, out exporting, out, if I might coin a word, gross national producting 700 million slaves on the mainland. You talk about trade with Red China. What have they got to trade? How many of you realize, for example, that Red China furnishes 70 to 80% of the world's heroin and 70 to 80% of this country's heroin? You know, you greet that with mixed emotion, don't you? No one can take Richard Nixon's war on narcotics seriously when his administration and his bureaucrats are covering up for where this heroin comes from. They have about 1 million acres under production. They have primarily in Yunnan province. They have had this as an official program since 1952. They make just from short of $1 billion to several $1 billion a year. This is such an official program that it's part of the troop activities in the Red Army as far as cultivating this product. It's for export only. They have no internal narcotics problem at all. It's strictly for export. As a matter of fact, in 1956, Chow En-lai told Nasser, words to this effect, not these exact words, but this was the gist of it: let the Americans come to Southeast Asia. We'll hook them on opium. We're growing the best for them. Now, he told that to Nasser back in '56. Why is our administration covering up for the fact that this is part of war? The Red Chinese are killing more Americans on the dope front in the streets of America than they're killing in Southeast Asia through their proxy state, North Vietnam. I should say that's the Soviet Union's proxy state, and let's get to that as an issue. The immorality of the war in Southeast Asia is not that we are aiding an ally in South Vietnam, and President Kissinger will just likely furnish twos. By the way, I understand he's going to make a secret trip to the United States one of these days. But the de facto president of the United States is probably right now trying to arrange a great extravaganza. Maybe a week or 2 weeks before the election, they'll put on as if they've ended the war in Southeast Asia. They won't. It'll just be transferred to Thailand or maybe the Middle East. But no one can take our efforts in either peace or war seriously as long as we continue to furnish the sinews of war to both sides. The immorality of that war is not that we're aiding an ally in South Vietnam. It's that we are sending our troops into a no-win, undeclared war while we keep the enemy in North Vietnam. We keep them in the ball game by furnishing them the sinews of war. This is a very highly technological war. And let's take, for example, surface-to-air missiles. I'm an aviator. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps Reserve. By the way. I served 8 years active duty as an aviator. If I had stayed on active duty, if I'd be on active duty right now, I'd be flying a very highly technical, highly computerized aircraft over North Vietnam. I'd be going towards the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and I'd be shooting up trucks on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. My plane would have been built. My plane would have been built in factories built by American technology. I would be shooting up trucks on the Ho Chi Minh Trail that were built in factories that were built by American technology. Now, those trucks would have probably been built in the Zill factory, which is built by the A.J. Brandt Company of Detroit, Michigan, or maybe the Gorky factory, which is built by Ford Motor Company. Right now, American technicians and technologists are building the largest truck factory in the world. Not in Detroit, not in Southern California, but on the Kama River in the Soviet Union. It'll turn out more trucks in 1 year in one factory than all American factories combined. Now, on my way, and by the way, there is no such thing as a peaceful truck when operated by the enemy. We are building their trucks. I would be on the way to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I'd be dodging surface-to-air missiles. All those surface-to-air missiles were built in the Soviet Union. Now, we hear a lot about the POWs, but very few of you are hearing what I've been saying about how those people got to be POWs. They were shot out of the skies. They're aviators. They were shot out of the skies by Soviet-built surface-to-air missiles. Last May, our president, the commander-in-chief, was on a so-called peace and trade mission to Moscow, talking to the manufacturers of those surface-to-air missiles. And what was he talking about bringing them, according to newspaper accounts? Advanced computerized technology. Now, those surface-to-air missiles are or can be very highly computerized to make them more efficient. Now, when the president brings them advanced computerized technology, that advanced computerized technology can be used for many things, not the least of which is to make more efficient the instruments of war that are changing our pilots into dead men and POWs. Now, I've mentioned that in every speech and every press conference that I've been in. And I've been in a lot of them. I've been campaigning steadily since early August. I haven't had a day off. And 40. Now I'm not complaining. I'm just asking you to ask the question: when have you seen this on the boob tube or on AP and UPI? The point is, this is the one issue that's never been over the wire services about the United States furnishing the technology. 90 to 95% of the technology of the military-industrial complex of the Soviet Union comes from the United States or its NATO allies. If it were not for the United States and its NATO allies, there would be, for all practical purposes, no Soviet technology. This technological trade we talk about, is a one-way street for all practical purposes. Now, the Soviet military-industrial complex furnishes 80% of the armaments for North Vietnam. So the real tragedy and the real immorality of the war in Southeast Asia is that blue and white collar workers in this country and in Southern California are out of work because their technology has been sent to an enemy under peaceful trade by the Commerce Department Richard Nixon, by the way, has asked a year or so ago, he asked and he pressured Congress to dropping that prohibition from the Export-Import Bank Bill, which prohibited us from lending our own money to communist countries as long as they are furnishing the armaments to kill our troops. And Richard Nixon asked that that prohibition in the Export-Import Bank Bill be dropped, and the White House itself pressured Congress to drop it, and we didn't know why. I, of course, voted to keep it in, but we didn't know why until Richard Nixon announced his trips to Peking and Moscow. And now we lend our own money to them so they can trade with us, so we can send them our technology to make more efficient the instruments of war that are killing our troops. That is the immorality. Blue and white collar workers in this country are out of work because they have lost their jobs, because their technology has been transferred to an enemy who builds up a war machine which then kills the sons of those blue and white collar workers in a no-win undeclared war. That's the immorality of the war in Southeast Asia. And if you want any book, chapter, or verse on what I've told you about the technological trade, write or read either the works of Dr. Anthony Sutton of Stanford University at the research, he's a research fellow at the Hoover Institute there, or read the works of the German Dr. Werner Keller in his book, especially East minus West equals zero. But let's point about history. Let's talk about, and while we're talking about history, let's talk about history. There is virtually no historical precedent that trading with an enemy changes him into a non-enemy. Neither is there historical precedent for believing that signing treaties with an enemy leads to peace. I'll let you read a book. I'll point out a book to you written by a Southern Californian. I think most of you are familiar with Tony Bielenson, the state senator, who is the author of of California's liberalized abortion law. And by the way, our party is for capital punishment and against abortion, but Tony Bielenson's cousin, Lawrence Bielenson, has recently authored a book called The Treaty Trap. He takes the last 300 years of world history and draws a correlation between treaties and peace. And he finds that exactly those nations which rely on treaties for peace are exactly those most apt to get war. That there is no correlation between signing treaties and peace. In fact, there is an inverse correlation. That if you rely on treaties and paper treaties for peace, you're more apt to get war than if you rely on the traditional means of preserving peace. And George Washington, if I might paraphrase him, put it this way: the surest road to peace is to let it be known that you're always prepared for war. And that is the way that peace has come. There is, let's face it, what makes us think that we can change history on trading with enemies or on signing treaties? As John Jay, one of our first diplomats, said, I wouldn't give a farthing for parchment security. They, referring to paper treaties, last only as long as either side's willing to tear them up. Now, I'll tell you one other thing while we're on war and treaties and peace and so forth. Historically, and you have probably learned this in your history classes, and that is that tyrants or would-be tyrants engage in mischievous foreign wars to get people's minds off of the fact that they're totalitarianizing at home. And let's face it, that's going on over there. We have no intention of winning, and no one can take our efforts in peace or war seriously when we furnish the sinews of war to both sides. And that's the immorality, not what your McGovernites are telling you, that the immorality is somehow or the fact that we're aiding the so-called wicked regime in the South. How about the aiding the wicked regime in the North? How about getting on that one for a while? Now, let me, at this point, just mention one other issue and then open it up for questions, and that's the one I mentioned earlier when I said Richard Nixon in 4 years in office has accounted for 1/4 of the entire national debt. You know, the primary cause of inflation is what? What is the primary cause of inflation? The war. Oh, the war? Hey, wait, let me tell you something. Do you know why your taxes are high? Not because of defense expenditures. Let me give you some statistics. In the last 15 years, haven't you heard, we're reordering our priorities. We've been reordering priorities, and Richard Nixon proudly says that he is the first administration spending more money on butter than guns. He thinks that's a good deal. How come these McGovernites are cheering for Richard Nixon here? I can see how McGovernites would cheer for Nixon, but for conservatives to cheer Nixon makes about as much sense as Indians applauding a John Wayne movie. I'll tell you this: when Peking and Moscow and Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan, all four want Richard Nixon reelected. A couple of them are getting fooled, or we've been fooled by a couple of them. But let me get back to what's the primary cause of inflation. You say it's the war? Well, government expenditures are, but what are we spending our money on? In the last 15 years, the defense cut of the federal budget pie has gone from about 60% to 30%. While during the same period, and we now find ourselves number 2 militarily to a system sworn to our destruction, which can't even build their own trucks. Yeah. Look, I voted against the Lockheed loan, and I led the fight against the loan to. I'll get into that in the question and answer phase, but let me run my speech in my order, and then we'll open it up for questions, please. But as a former philosophy instructor, let me say this: that there is a. You can't change history, folks. I'm sorry, I did. Yeah. There's an old saying in the history of philosophy that the wish is father to the thought. And wishing something doesn't make it so. You can wish that history doesn't teach us what I've told you. You can wish that you can take all your defense expenditures and transfer them to having the government give you the goodies, and so that you don't have to work for them. You can wish that that'll work, but it has never worked for any other nation, and why should it work for us? And in the last 15 years, our defense appropriations have gone from about 60% to 30%, while that euphemism for socialism, human resources development, has gone from 20% to 40%, until it's now the major cut of the national the budget pie. Military defense is second, and moving into a solid third place is interest in the national debt. By the way, do you know why a newborn baby cries? Because he's naked and he's hungry and he already owes the government $5,800. But the primary cause of inflation is deficit spending on the part of government, and government is the cause of inflation. I hate to use a Herblock cartoon to prove one of my points, because Herblock is hardly a conservative cartoonist. But here's the cartoonist. By the way, the lippy one here that keeps butting into my speech has a big McGovern shirt on, in case those of you back there have been bothered by him butting in on me. But he's Okay, let me tell you about this Herblock cartoon. And I wish the cameras would play on him. He's really a nice-looking fella. Here's this Herblock cartoon. It's got a body. It says the U.S. economy. It's got a couple of tire marks across the body. The body needs medical care. The tire marks stop about 6 feet away, or 6 yards away, and there the car stops, and out of the driver's seat or door comes the driver, and he's undoubtedly a doctor. He's got a satchel. It says R. Nixon, M.D., and the caption is, "It's a good thing I arrived." Now, you see, this is Richard Nixon saying he is now going to solve and use the government to solve the problem of inflation. The government can't solve the problem of inflation because in economics, as elsewhere, the government is the cause of the problem, not the solution to the problem. The government is the cause of inflation. Let me ask you a question. Why can't you own gold? Okay. No, it's not. It's not too expensive. It's a good deal. But why is it illegal? Why can you not own gold? Ask yourself that question. Why is it illegal for you to own gold? Yeah. Do you know why? Do you know? And let me hit this economic lesson through to you. that if you were allowed to own gold, it would make you independent of a controlled monetary system, because as long as the government can control our monetary system, they use it as an indirect form of taxation. By raising the debt ceiling, that allows the government, and I'm giving a simplistic solution to economics that your economics professors will undoubtedly say is oversimplifying, and it is for the sense of the lecture here. But let me just say, when we raise the debt ceiling $50 billion, it allows the government to take that $50 billion bonded indebtedness, trade it to the Federal Reserve System, which they then use to back up the printing of more Federal Reserve notes. You see, your Federal Reserve notes are not backed by gold or silver anymore. At best, what we can say about those Federal Reserve notes is that the sum total of dollars is the sum total of claim checks on the total value of the United States. And if you increase the number of claim checks without increasing that which they are a claim on in the same proportion, then each claim check claims less, and you need more claim checks to claim the same thing. That's inflation. And government, by operating in deficit, is the primary cause of inflation. And they're using it as an indirect tax, and Richard Nixon is the primary cause of inflation because he's run up 1/4 of the entire national debt. Now, you know, back in '68 when he was campaigning against inflation, he said inflation is like holding a lid on a boiling kettle. Unless you turn the heat down, you won't solve the problem. You can have the illusion of keeping the lid on and keeping that steam in there, but it's going to blow eventually unless you turn the heat down. The heat is deficit spending. And by the way, apparently he doesn't care now as long as it blows after November 7th. But it's going to blow. And price and wage controls have not stopped inflation. It's gone up faster since any time since inflation than the time prior to inflation, which was before price and wage controls. I mean, the inflation has gone up in the years since price and wage controls faster than the year before, which was such a bad year that we had to have price and wage controls. Well, let me at this point just reiterate what I have said. Under the guise of moderate conservative Richard Nixon, whether it's been price and wage controls, which do not solve the problem of inflation, but do bring us closer to totalitarianism, because totalitarian countries do have price and wage controls. Neither do totalitarian countries allow you to own gold. Totalitarian countries have gun controls, and our party feels that when guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. We are headed towards totalitarianism, and folks, if you think that either Richard Nixon or George McGovern is going to stop that march towards totalitarianism, you're mistaken. There's only one party that is on the record, that has the platform. It has the ticket. If I might toot my own horn, I've never broken a campaign promise in 8 years in public office and never voted for a tax increase. And we have a party that, if everyone read our platform before going to the polls, we'd win. Why is it, ask yourself, why is it that there are only 3 parties on the national scene that are on the majority of state ballots? The Republicans, the Democrats, and the American Party. We're the only 3 parties on the majority of state ballots. And yet, to watch the boob tube, ABC, NBC, CBS, or looking at the newspapers through UPI and AP, you'd think the only choices you had were Richard Nixon, the man who broke virtually every campaign promise he made, or George McGovern, the man who, if elected, we'd only hope and pray that he would break every campaign promise he made. Now, with that, let me open it up for questions now. You go ahead, fire away. We'll take them only from either end where we have the microphones here. Yes, we have one over here from a fellow member of the Mustache Mafia. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Schmitz, you said that if you are elected president, you would refuse to enforce federal court orders on busing to achieve racial balance in the schools. How would you reconcile this with the sworn responsibility of the presidency to uphold and enforce the law of the land as interpreted by the courts of the land?
That is not what it says to, you added that last part, as interpreted by the courts of the land.
That's my question.
Where did you read that from? You didn't read that from the Constitution.
One of your campaign folders say that
I know, by the way, I know, I have said, I mean the last part. Now wait, I have said that first part, but that last part where you said as interpreted by the...
I'm not asking if you have said this. I'm merely asking is how you would reconcile this with the responsibility of the presidency to enforce the laws of the federal judiciary.
Of course, you see, you are assuming that the judiciary has done other than usurp their power in legislating. Our founding fathers built a tripartite system of government based on checks and balances in which the legislature is supposed to set policy. The courts are supposed to not legislate. They are not supposed to make law. They are supposed to rule on cases within the Constitution on law, and the courts are legislating. And right now, when they usurp the power of the legislature and pass laws, then we ought to make them undergo the occupational hazards of legislators. As our party says, let them come up for re-election, such as state judges. And I have said this, in carrying out and executing the usurpation of power by the courts, but the usurpation of the legislative power, I would be compounding the violation of the Constitution by the courts. It is the courts who are in violation of the Constitution, and cooperating with them would be compounding the crime.
I'm not to belabor the point, Mr. Schmitz, but
Now, you may not like my answer, but I gave you an answer. I gave you a very direct answer. I disagree with your interpretation, in which you have said that the Constitution says that the courts are supposed to interpret and they become the law of the land. Whoever said they were the law of the land? Andrew Jackson said John Marshall made his decision. Let him enforce it. Who jumped on Andrew Jackson when he said that? And I'd take my attitude would be exactly the same as Andrew Jackson.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Schmitz.
Yeah. Okay, on this side.
As President of the United States, would you seek a military victory in the Republic of Vietnam?
I would use common sense, and we could get that war down to where the South Vietnamese could handle it, and they might very well be victorious. If that's what you mean, if. You know, I'll be glad to accept questions if you folks will allow me to answer the questions. Let's have a little civility here. You may not like my answers, but ask any other. Have any other presidents stood here and answered their questions in front of you? Yeah. Yes. Did you let them answer?
Mayor Lynch.
Did you let them answer? Okay. I would, as I have said in my speech, I would stop the aid and trade to the enemy. I would cut out the technological drain to the Soviet Union, which furnishes 80% of the technological and the armaments for North Vietnam. And if we withdrew that, even Dr. Anthony Sutton at Stanford University at the Hoover Institute has said that that war could be stopped with a phone call or a piece of paper. And that's what I would do. I would stop it with that phone call to my Commerce Department. Yes. Western. We'll have this side here.
Okay. America became great because its people...
I'd like to comment on something a minute. You know, you folks have been laughing very nervously. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to think about what I've said. Just think about what I've said and stop your nervous laughs and just listen and just think and ask yourself if maybe there isn't something to what this candidate is saying. Maybe there is a reason why the establishment doesn't want people to know that there is a choice other than Richard Nixon or George McGovern. Ask yourselves that. You claim to be anti-establishment. There's only one anti-establishment party on the scene, and that's the American Party. Yeah.
I would like to make a comment.
Yes.
And that is, I don't think the students are brainwashed. I think you are brainwashed.
Okay. Young man, do you have a question?
Yes.
Wait a while, just a minute. You mean that's the fellow holding the mic? He was commenting on that? You know, do you know what? How many of you have read George Orwell's 1984? Yeah. Do you know what you're doing right now? You've got a three-dimensional object of hate here, don't you? You've entered 1984 ahead of time. There you've got someone, you said, ha, the object of hate. Oh, boy. You know, you've really, look. There are some of you out there in the audience that are salvageable. There are some of you that are salvageable. And the rest of you are so brain-laundered by your professors that you're not salvageable anyway. But I'm speaking to the remnant out there that are salvageable.
Okay.
Look, when we've got...
Okay, America became great because our people seem to have reason to ransack our resources. Now it's about time we figure out that our resources are about nil. We have come to a peak of our fossil resources. I want to ask you this question. With our fossil resources getting lower and lower, we have to increase our oil import quotas. where we're going to have to outlay more money, where our resources now we're going to need more and more labor to produce less and less, how are we going to prevent the eventual downfall of America?
But with nuclear energy.
How are we going to transport all these people in nuclear cars?
Nuclear energy is the proper source. If these super ecologists would stop, would cease the hindering of the building of nuclear reactor plants. His question from over here.
Yes, Mr. Lame Duck Representative Schmitz. Under what conditions would you give up on America and leave the country?
Pardon? I didn't.
Stating, under what conditions would you give up?
I'm sorry, I can't hear the question. Would you please say that? Yes, well, the question,
under
please.
Under what conditions would you give up on the American people to come around to your point of view and leave the country and decide it's not worth it anymore?
You mean when the enemy takes over completely and we're in George Orwell's 1984?
12 years and you're going?
We are heading towards 1984. Look, let me tell you this. That I am in this American party to stay. I have burnt my bridges with the Republican Party. I have never felt so good. For those of you Republicans, try it. You'll like it. I noticed the TV camera got the question but wasn't interested in hearing the answer. But we'll...
Mr. Schmitz.
That's all right. That's typical. But I believe... The gentleman asks, when do I feel would I give up and leave the country? And this is my country. I was born here. My ancestors were born here. My ancestors were pioneers here. And no one's going to steal this country from me. The American Party is either the beginning of the American political renaissance or the beginning of the dying gasp of Western civilization and the American Republic. And we are going to make this, and we believe that it may take a near miracle or a miracle itself to save this country. But we believe that we may rate that miracle because our party still believes in God and still believes in miracles. And we believe that, yes, we believe in the traditional values that built this country. And we believe in what our founding fathers set up, that they will have to have a limited government, and any government which stays within its limits will serve us well. It'll, like fire, it'll cook our food. It'll... heat our home, but if it gets out of hand and gets out of the fireplace, it'll destroy the very meaning to the fireplace. I'll tell you this, our party believes that we may need a miracle to do this. And we believe that we've got to follow St. Augustine's words that we're going to act as if everything depends upon ourselves and pray as if everything depends upon God. And we are unashamedly dependent and banking on God's help in this fight. And if you people don't believe in God, I'll tell you this. Yeah, God's on your side. I'd like to have you get down on your knees and pray the way our campaign is set 6 to 7 Central Standard Time every night between now and the campaign as a national prayer hour for our victory.
I pray to speak. I pray to speak. Mr. Schmitz,
yes.
You have written an introduction to a book called None Dare Call It Treason.
No, none dare call it conspiracy.
None dare call it conspiracy, excuse me. The main point in this book is that there is an international set of bankers who are going to impose a planetary communistic system.
Well, wait a while.
And have you read
May
the book? I finish my question, sir?
In your question, you've already had two errors in the question. One, the title of the book, and the other one, the gist of the plot of the book. And I can't believe you've read the book. I can't believe you've read the book. If you
is one point in the book. Is one point in the book that a certain set of, you might call them Jewish International Petrochemical Diamond Trust conspirators, attempting to control economies in a socialistic bent and profit from this. A moment ago you said the few good people in Taiwan were outproducing the hordes in China. Do you think it's possible that these bankers are clever enough to think they could make a higher profit in a country like Taiwan, free and vigorous, than in a socialistic country like China?
Did you, let me ask before I answer that, did you read the book?
Well...
Yeah.
I'm acquainted with all the points in that book from
yes,
the other...
I know. You've read the ADL criticism of it, haven't you?
No.
And that's the gist of it.
No, I've read all of those points
look,
in...
I will...
I've read those points in the American Mercury, which surely you agree with.
I would like to thank the gentleman for being at least honest enough to admit that he didn't read the book and yet asked a question on it. But I'll tell you this, I wish all of you would read that book and draw your own conclusions. Read the book.
Answer my question. Can these bankers make a bigger profit in a free market or in a socialistic country?
The question was an erroneous question. As a former logic teacher, I refuse to answer a question that is... I will say this, read the book. It's None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen. And I'll answer your question this way. I'll give you a little preview of coming attractions, but I want you to read the book. There's an old saying that he who controls my purse strings controls me. I control my 7 children in many ways, not the least of which is that I control their money. Your parents sometimes control you because they control your money. States control cities and counties because they control their money. Now that we have revenue sharing, states will be controlled completely by the federal government because they control their money. Why is it inconceivable to believe that a few people, a few international bankers getting together and setting up an international monetary system, as they did in the past and just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago, why is it inconceivable that they will not control nations? And by the way, I wish everyone would read the book rather than, the gentleman didn't read the book, and he asked the question straight out of the ADL criticism of the book without reading the book, but that's the Anti-Defamation League, and I would just invite all of you to read that book, and you'd be surprised. You may end up working in our campaign.
Mr. Schmitz? Mr. Schmitz?
What? Wait a minute. We have time for 2 more questions.
Oh.
Okay, one from this side.
Yeah, I was very enlightened by your speech, and I want to say one thing, that you missed the following issues: child care, racism in America, the wage freeze, the war, high corporate profits, every issue that the American people are moving on in a progressive way you did not meet. The reason you didn't do that is because, like Hitler, all demagogues get off the issue. I urge people to go out, end the war in Vietnam, and get out and work and elect a person who's going to end the war in this country. And I think this man should know that everyone in here, I think, has behaved themselves quite well today, and to give an applause for the people who are working to end the war in Vietnam and end racism in this country.
Yeah. I'm not saying the young man was a communist, but he did have a red armband and gave the communist clenched fist salute after his speech. Yeah. You know, didn't any of you see him giving the clenched fist salute back there with his red armband on? Okay. Yeah. By the way, I did talk about most of those issues. I didn't talk about child development, but I could have. That Richard Nixon in the 72 platform of the Republican Party has a plank on that totalitarian move to set up child development centers and get the government into taking care of the first 5 years of life. Richard Nixon, that so-called moderate conservative, has taken that last totalitarian step towards getting into the last 5 years of life after claiming he vetoed that bill because he was trying to preserve the family. He did it under pressure. He knew it would hurt him in the election. And I did talk about those other issues that the gentleman mentioned. And as far as racism in this country, it's the Republicans and the Democrats who are racist. They're the ones creating this quota system that says you've got to be taken in to work or to a school because of a race or membership in an ethnic, racial, or religious minority group. Our party says anyone, if they want to come to us as individual Americans, can come to us, but we're not going to kowtow to ethnic, racial, and religious minority groups as groups. That's racism, and we're not going to be guilty of it.
May I quote from the book which you referred to? One major reason...
This is the last question. Yeah, go ahead.
One major reason for the historical blackout on the role of the international bankers in political history is that the Rothschilds were Jewish. Anti-Semites have played into the hands of the conspiracy by trying to portray the entire conspiracy as Jewish. Nothing else could be farther from the truth. Traditional Anglo-Saxons, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, international banking institutions have played a key role in the conspiracy. But there's no denying that the importance of the Rothschilds and their satellites, and the rest of the book has a lot of mentions of the Warburg, Schiffs, and other Jews. I'd like to know what your reaction is and how the Jews or the Rothschilds are now controlling the Federal Reserve System.
The book doesn't say that. Now, this is a wife-beating question again. You create your own.
the book, sir.
I know, but then you switch to your own question and your own conclusion on that. You read properly from the book.
And I also read the rest of the book, which
yes.
had the Warburgs and the Schiffs and the Rockefellers sort of coming in the back doors and being fed by the Warburgs.
Let me tell you something very interesting about that book. Would you read on the front of the book who the author is and who he wrote it with?
It was written by Gary Allen
with who?
Larry Abraham.
Yes, with Larry Abraham. Now, let me indicate. I'm going to answer this question. You know, Larry Abraham, who wrote that book along with Gary Allen, is also the reason his being involved in my campaign. He is my Western director. And Larry Abraham is also the reason why Gerald L.K. Smith has told people to vote for Richard Nixon, because Larry Abraham, a Jew, is working in my campaign. Isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that Larry Abraham is and the book he wrote is at one time the source of my charge, the charge against my campaign as being anti-Semitic, and I suppose Gerald L.K. Smith would call it Jew stoogery. Isn't it interesting that the same person, Larry Abraham, is the cause of both? Look, let's face it, folks.
What are the Rothschilds up to right now?
Let's face
That's
it,
what I'd
folks.
like
I think
to know.
everyone could solve this question by getting to the source. I would like all of you to read that book and draw your own conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.